Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, today we are talking about redistricting and the impact on public education and your school communities. The man whose firm was in charge of redrawing the congressional maps, Paul Mitchell, on the show today to talk all things Prop 50.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it's a few minutes after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazwata, ACSA's Executive Director. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We're honored to have you with us today. Go ahead and jump into the chat and say hello and let us know where you're watching from. Edgar, it's rare that we are coming on 3 minutes late. But our guest, Paul Mitchell, who has been involved in Proposition 50 and the redrawing of the congressional lines, there's so much to talk to him about, whether it's this election or things that are coming up in 2026.
In other words, you were talking too much, Naj. You were geeking out backstage. You made us late. That's the bottom line. Hey, before we jump in the conversation, Naj, though, this came up because and I was like, this, I'm going to ask Naj this on the air. So we make a big deal, and I think it's you make a big deal about our holiday episode, right? Around Christmas, and we always, I think we're usually talking budget or, for the next year, and you love to bring out your holiday gear.
Right.
But I think some people are accusing you of bah humbug because I know downstairs as we're here, our teams here at ACSA are having a Halloween party. So I did get posed the question: how does Naj? Is Naj anti-Halloween? How come Halloween isn't getting the same billing, as the Christmas episode?
The same pub as the Christmas as the holiday party?
Like, that's a great question. I'm going to bring it to the man. So
how about this? My diet does not allow for the Halloween treats that are downstairs.
That just to be clear, I think what they were really looking for was less about you eating. How come Naj is not in costume on the lunch break? That was, I think, what people wanted to see.
That's all right. I am in costume, right? I've come as the host of this show. That's what my costume is. If they got an issue with it, they can come up to my office and we can talk about it, right?
Hey, I take feedback from our team members. I'm just, I'm really
carrying the message. That's for sure. Folks, as we said, Paul Mitchell, data consultant, redistricting expert, going to be on the show in a couple of minutes to talk specifically about the impact of Proposition 50 and how redistricting may impact your work, especially in your school communities. We do have some news headlines for you, and we'll start with a California public school district that is suing the U.S. Department of Education over the cuts to mental health grants that the district was relying on to support students. The McKinleyville Union School District in Humboldt County and 48 other districts were notified in April that $168 million in remaining mental health funding was being cut in California. This lawsuit is the first on behalf of a single school district in California without the funding, according to this article in the Shasta Scout. California schools are set to lose hundreds of counselors, social workers, and mental health support staff on December 31st. In the case of McKinleyville, they expected to receive $6 million over 4 years to support mental health services. 58% of the students in Humboldt County have experienced some type of traumatic event, including homelessness and abuse. An attorney representing the district told reporters that the president's administration delivered McKinleyville a, quote, boilerplate letter as it had to other districts, saying that the district had violated their standard of merit, fairness, and excellence in education and failed to comply with the priorities and policy preferences of the Trump administration. So we will monitor that. Also wanted to point out to you an interesting article in Cal Matters from our friend Carolyn Jones. We'll put a link to that article, Edgar, into our comment section, into our chat, because it talks about the evolution of secondary schools. And it gives an example of one school in our Central Valley where they've stepped away from those rigid class times and instructional practices, and they bring in some content design that's focused on the student interests, more personal connections with educators, coursework that's directly connected to college and community needs. So we'll put that over in the chat. Edgar, let me just go back 30 seconds to get your reaction now that we have the first school district that is suing the federal government, at least here in California, about those mental health cuts. We know how important these mental health workers, the social emotional wellness of our students is. To have these kinds of cuts, it's impactful, especially in a small community, and this district is doing something about it.
Yeah, it's been part of our advocacy in terms of showing that what was interesting about some of these mental health cuts, that, you know, we talk about so many of these issues that, whether right or wrong, can be viewed as partisan, or these funds, and that's been a kind of a strategy of the Trump administration to cut off funding to particular programs and states, that they're Democratic programs or liberal programs or whatnot. I think in this case, one of the interesting data from these mental health grants is that they're helping students in all parts of the community. I mean, name like you just stated, in terms of districts that are benefiting from this. And we saw that as we were pushing and trying to do some of our advocacy on this issue in Congress and in DC. And I know last night we were going back and forth with the governor's office. I actually think there is some developments here where, you know, the state has gotten involved. I think there was some talk, some injunctions here. So there'll be more to come here. But yeah, to the point of, I do appreciate that some of our individual communities are kind of highlighting what the specific impact. You know, it's one thing to talk about it at the broad scale, at the national scale, but what this actually goes, how this is benefiting kids in communities, I think that's the best type of advocacy.
Yeah. Hey, I want to point out, I was going to try and ignore this one. Jason Engel talking about more important than Prop 50. Let's go Dodgers. I'm going to just,
it's funny. It's funny because I've been a little sleep deprived over the last 2 days. I stayed up, whatever it was, all 6 hours and 30 minutes, all 18 innings a couple of nights ago. Yesterday it didn't go as well. I think everybody was a little sleepy. The bats were definitely a little sleepy last night. I'm you know, my focus in a couple hours here turns right back to the anxiety that is World Series baseball.
That is World Series. Yeah.
Appreciate Jason chiming in there.
Yeah. Hey, also want to point out Dr. Nancy Padilla watching from the beautiful island of Kauai. Yes, that would be a beautiful place to be right now. So
I love when our members are just flexing the beautiful places. And, you know, sometimes they're retirees and whatnot. But hey, that's part of the journey, right? Work hard and get to that point. So that's
absolutely awesome. Absolutely. Folks, let's switch to our guest right now. You know, special election, you know, election day coming up, although there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of votes that have already been cast in this special election on Proposition 50, which is the redistricting, the congressional redistricting here in the state of California. Joining us today is Paul Mitchell. He's a data consultant and redistricting expert. He's done redistricting lines and maps all over the country and doing it here in California now. Paul, you've joined us on the show before. We're always honored to have you here. This time, your involvement seems especially timely. Can you share the story behind how you became part of this redistricting process?
Well, it actually started as a bluff. I think that could kind of be the headline. What actually happened was, over the summer, when Donald Trump started advocating for Texas to redraw districts, and there was this whole seeming national movement, folks in California started to feel like, this was some existential threat. And so there was this move to try to push back on what Texas was doing. And I was asked by the governor's office and members of Congress, like, can you do something to like make it visible that California can push back, that we can have, if they're going to redraw districts in Texas, we could redraw districts in California and kind of undo what they've done. And so I went on 2 Sunday talk shows in Texas. I'd never done that before. I started drawing maps. There was discussion about potentially leaking maps. There was a whole push to try to get the Republican members of Congress to go to the White House and try to get, use their leverage to change what was happening in Texas and these other states. And when that ultimately failed, the whole thing pivoted. I went from being out there waving my arms around saying California is going to redraw districts to basically turning off my phone for 3 weeks and working with my team at Redistricting Partners. A lot of our staff came back to work on this and developing mapping options that members of Congress could look at to determine, if they were going to push back on what Texas is doing, could they do it within certain confines of, certain rules? One being, obviously, there's a whole set of California values around redistricting. So can we do this while following the Voting Rights Act? That was a concern in other states that are doing this gerrymandering around the country. A lot of them are kind of throwing Voting Rights Act out the window or redefining the Voting Rights Act in different ways. Can we do it while preserving kind of the architecture of the Redistricting Commission lines? There were things being put on Twitter that would draw districts that go from Santa Monica to Hemet, and then another district from Santa Monica to Hemet, and another one from Santa Monica to Kern. Like, can we do it in a rational set of lines? Can we protect communities of interest? Can we, preserve the good things in the redistricting plan while still pushing back? So a lot of time working on drawing. As you know, all of my work, the over 100 redistrictings I've done in California, some for the agencies of people that I see here in this chat, has all been nonpartisan. It's all been focused on the state's Fair Maps Act. I've done statewide redistricting in New York twice with their independent redistricting commission. I've done some of the biggest cities and counties in the state. I've worked in 14 different states, and this is the first time that I was ever asked to put partisanship in as a criteria as we drew these maps. So that's essentially the how it began and what the main process was. So folks know I'm not on the Prop 50 campaign. After the lines were drawn, my job was done. I have done a lot of media and discussion about the process and about what this means, but I'm not here to kind of shill for the campaign. I'm just the data guy.
Yeah. Yeah, a data guy with a lot of influence. So you definitely have had your fingerprint on all this, and appreciate you giving us your insight. And I actually appreciate you just kind of setting the stage here, acknowledging that, like the Fair Voting Act, some of the precedents that have gone into play even before this. And we know that the political environment that kind of led to this. And it's worth noting that I think even amongst our membership of educators, there's different views. I mean, I think some of the polling that, shows that there's people feel very strongly one way about this, regardless of what they feel about what's happening in DC or the federal administration. But with that said, you had a job here in terms of with a very particular objective. What factors, and you noted a little bit of this in your previous answer, like what data, what guided your approach in terms of drawing those maps?
So kind of like how I got through high school, a lot of what guided my approach was looking at the other guys' work. It was kind of like looking over the shoulder of the State Redistricting Commission and seeing what they did when they drew their lines, because we didn't want to kind of come in and just erase what was there already. We wanted to come in and work off of the great things in the State Redistricting Commission's map. Like, I had somebody ask me, are you the best line drawer in California? I was like, no. Karen McDonald, the State Redistricting Commission demographer, she is the best. And what the commission did in the plan that they created for the state in 2021 and 2011 did the best job of balancing a lot of complex criteria over a big period of time, building a lot of public support through the process they did. And I was put in a position of, can we do something to deal with this existential crisis in the next few weeks, get it passed by the legislature, get the voters to vote on it? So my task was very different than theirs. But as I came into it, a lot of what I was trying to do was use those great redistricting criteria that are in the state's Fair Maps Act and in the state constitution, the criteria the commission uses. So districts obviously have to be equal size. So that's one criteria. There is a federal Voting Rights Act, and the state commission identified 16 districts that were designated as Voting Rights Act districts. We also know from having spent so much time working in these communities that there are really strong districts around Black communities of interest, Asian communities of interest, Chaldean communities of interest, Armenian communities of interest, in addition to areas that have identity, like, areas of Silicon Valley with their community of interest, or rural communities of interest, or, places with college campuses and how those fit in. So all of that, kind of trying to balance all of that while doing as little change to the existing commission lines. And it's noteworthy that 80% of the voters who will vote in 2026, if Prop 50 passes, will be voting in the same districts they were in before. So for the vast majority of voters in the state, there isn't going to be a change in their area. However, we were able to, with some adjustments, make districts that would push back on what happened in Texas. So it's kind of trying to achieve the goal without throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Folks, if you have any questions for Paul, go ahead and put those into the chat. We'll try and tackle some of those at the end of the show. Let's talk, Paul, about education. What role did public education play as you and your team were looking at the redrawing of the congressional lines? And how do you see these new district boundaries impacting public education from a federal lens?
So first off, the first piece is kind of easy. When we're drawing districts, we're looking at political geographies a lot of the time. And oftentimes we'll look at political geographies with regards to school districts. School districts are one agency that, unlike a lot of other communities, kind of crosses cities, sometimes crosses counties. You've got, and when you have an area that's within a school district, it is inherently like a community of interest. So if we're drawing districts and we need to justify, why did we cross this boundary, or why did we merge this city and that city together? Part of the reason might be, Malibu and Santa Monica are in the same school district. Maybe that's a touchy issue if you're at the Malibu Santa Monica Unified School District, but that is a fact. And there are other districts around the state that are like that, where you have the ability to kind of piggyback the line drawing on school district boundaries and use school districts that combine multiple cities together as part of a justification for how you draw those boundaries. The impact that this will have on education is really going to be determined by who wins these elections. So you're going to see, if these maps pass, potentially 3 to 5 more Democratic members of Congress. You're going to see slight changes in how these members might govern a little bit based on how their district has been changed. So as an example, I saw somebody in the chat was from Long Beach. In the pre-2020 redistrictings, Long Beach used to be paired with Orange County and was then the Alan Lowenthal seat. So it'd be like a Long Beach to Garden Grove kind of district. The last redistricting commission took Long Beach and put it up with the Southeast cities. So it became a majority minority Latino district. We put a new majority minority Latino district back in LA and pushed the Long Beach district to go down to through Seal Beach, Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, down the coast. And so Robert Garcia, who was in a district that was a majority minority Latino district where he had a 40-point partisan advantage and basically a very safe re-election every year. Now he is going to be in a district that goes down the coast. He'll still have a good district. I think he's still very happy with his district, but he's now going to be having to reach out to communities in Huntington Beach and Newport Beach that are different than the communities they used to have going up into, say, Downey. So the relationship that the Long Beach Unified School District has with him might be slightly different. And then in addition, like even K-12 or the community college in Long Beach actually goes outside north of Long Beach up into Paramount. That stuff's no longer in his district anymore. Now it's the other stuff. So these kind of relationships that members of Congress have might change. How they position themselves a little bit might change. I don't know so much if that's going to be in Robert Garcia's case, Robert Garcia changing or Huntington Beach changing. I don't know what's going to happen there, but it is going to be different in terms of maybe how your local representative governs a little bit, depending on how their district has changed.
Paul, as you noted, you're not part of the formal campaign, but this is some of your work, and obviously this campaign has gotten so much attention, not just here in California, but frankly around the country, right? Like I think there's going to be all eyeballs are going to be on what happens here next week. So having said that, and there's obviously a lot of the arguments that you see, whether in the paid ads or whatnot, I'm just curious, as the person who kind of led the work there, there's critiques, some like that it dilutes the voices of some voters, or that it unfairly splits cities up, or take whatever critique you might throw out there. As somebody who went into this with a particular objective, what would you say to some of those critiques that are out there about the final product?
So what's interesting is I've done a lot of redistrictings, and every time you do a redistricting, there's trade-offs. And so I've had to stand at the dais over, hundreds of times and heard community members or elected officials criticize maps that were making these trade-offs in a way that they weren't necessarily happy with. And that's part of the process. There is no perfect redistricting map. And so when you hear somebody say like, oh, I don't like this map because it puts Modoc in a district with Santa Rosa or with the coastline, it combines an urban area with a rural area. I don't like that. Or I don't like the fact that this particular city split. Well, I know, and I receive that, and I understand that, and I can acknowledge and actually appreciate the viewpoint of the people who are having that statement. But at the same time, this map takes a district that used to go from Death Valley to Roseville and Mount Lassen, that was the least compact district in the entire map, where I actually lived in Inyo County in Independence, and we never went to the Roseville Galleria. And so now that district's been changed. So it basically goes from Tahoe down the 80 down the 50 into Sacramento. It's a much more compact district. It's actually objectively a better district. And so for every district where somebody can say like, oh, I don't like this thing, I can point to another one. They can say, oh, I don't like the fact that Lodi split. But I can say, well, Vacaville, Martinez, and other cities in the area have all been kind of unified, and they were split in the old plan. In terms of objective measures, the old plan split 60 cities, and this plan split 57 cities. And then again, in terms of objective nonpartisan research, the Public Policy Institute of California said that this is roughly a status quo map that slightly improves voting power for Latinos. Cal Poly Pomona and Caltech came out with a study that said that it improves the Voting Rights Act district for Latinos. And UCLA Asian Studies Center came out with a report that said that this improves Asian voting strength, particularly in areas like that Garden Grove, Westminster area that I talked about earlier. So every time you draw a district, as an example, you're going to have a line that goes down a street, and you're going to have people on either side of the street saying, why is this line here? But when somebody moves that line to another street, you're just going to have different people saying, well, why is the line here? It's just a fact of redistricting. And it's worse in congressional redistricting because we have to draw districts to a one-person deviation. Somebody might say, hey, it was only like 300 people to unify this city. And it's like, okay, true, but go find me 300 other people that doesn't split a city somewhere else. So, it is a less than perfect process when you're doing that. Always has trade-offs.
I know you've been consistent. You just said it, so that in every conversation we've had with you, you always make that point about the trade-offs. What you just said now, would you say that is the biggest trade-off in terms of these maps, or what do you think that is?
Well, first off, we are talking about a redistricting that we have to admit was drawn with this purpose of, pushing back on Texas. So it was introducing a criteria that shouldn't be in a redistricting. So, as PPIC said, these maps are status quo, they're good maps, but we know that they were drawn with this additional criteria that just honestly shouldn't be a part of redistricting, and I agree with them. But aside from that, the trade-offs are when you draw maps, how do you deal with, say, a rural community? And oftentimes you can't put enough rural communities together to create one complete district. You have to pair rural communities and urban communities. And then also when you're drawing districts and you need to say preserve, let's say that Long Beach, Orange County, you need to preserve Latino communities of interest, Asian communities of interest in Orange County and LA, you're going to, as a result, have a district that goes way long from Long Beach down the coast into Newport. That the shape of the district might not be ideal because you're not able to, especially in a state like California, create 52 districts that are perfectly circles and squares and all look super pretty on a map. Oftentimes you have districts that are crescent shaped or kind of oddly shaped because of the way that those communities are laid out. So those trade-offs include, how do you keep multiple different communities of interest together? How do you balance the geographic requirements and the population requirements? And finally, one really good example of like a trade-off. There's this oddity that when you're drawing the districts on the Central Coast, that the city of Ventura, you can't keep the city of Ventura whole in the congressional plan and at the same time keep these three little cities around Ojai in the same district. You either have to jettison one of those three cities out of the district in order to keep Ventura whole, or keep Ventura whole and pick two of those three districts to be in the congressional seat. It's just this weird back and forth. And the commission went back and forth, back and forth. At the end, it seemed like they were going to flip a coin and decide which way to go. And what they ended up doing was splitting Ventura and keeping those three cities up near Ojai together. So we just did the opposite. We ended up in our plan keeping Ventura together and moving one of those cities out of the district up near Ojai. A trade-off where the commission chose one way last time, we chose this way this time, but neither is like, they're both 50-50 choices.
Paul, you made a couple of comments here. These congressional lines being drawn with this additional criteria that hasn't been part of the discussion before. And then this has been a response to combat what Texas is doing without the voters' will. Are you concerned about this setting a precedent, not just here in California, but across the country, especially since you have an insight into this with so many other communities that you've been involved in when it comes to redistricting?
Yeah. So first off, this won't affect any local redistrictings. We, still have the Fair Maps Act. We, almost never even see partisanship become a criteria in local redistricting. There are some examples, like San Diego had a pretty partisan redistricting process, even though it wasn't, it is what it is. So usually we don't have partisanship be a big criteria in local redistricting, but I think you actually go back to the real failure in this area, which was when the Supreme Court was given an opportunity to make partisan redistricting, partisan gerrymandering illegal. And they had experts come forward with ways to evaluate partisan redistricting. And there are statistical methods that you can use to evaluate partisan redistricting. One of them, Eric McGee at Public Policy Institute in California developed a metric that allows you to see essentially the amount of wasted votes in a redistricting plan and how much kind of a way to prove that partisanship was part of the criteria. The court, one of the justices called that sociological gobbledygook and basically dismissed the math because it was confusing to them. And as a result, they said, well, they kind of threw their hands up and they said, it's non-judiciable. I can always get the pronunciation wrong, but you cannot adjudicate partisan redistricting. So therefore, we'll just leave it to the states to do whatever policies they want. Having stepped out of that arena and taken that as something that can't even be taken to a federal court anymore, that's what opened the floodgates nationally to a lot of this. And then what ends up happening, unfortunately, is you do have racial gerrymandering disguised as partisan gerrymandering. It is the weirdest thing. They can draw districts to disenfranchise a Black or Latino or Asian community. And when they go to court, they go, oh, no, we were just drawing them all in a district because we didn't want a Democrat or Republican to win. The games that happen in all of this gerrymandering stuff around the country are unconscionable. We should not be doing any of it. So in California, we do have this one redistricting cycle that we're doing through this novel way of sending 22 million voters a map and asking them to give a thumbs up or thumbs down on it. This is not something that's going to be replicated. This does not change the constitutional language that establishes the commission, gives them their authority, gives them their criteria, and will be back in place in 2032 no matter what. The time frame on this just expires. There's no like sneaky language in there that says in 2031, Paul Mitchell jumps out of a cake and we're going to have another redistricting done like this. It is a one-time thing. So I don't think it sets a precedent. I think hopefully this whole cycle, this whole year-long saga, all these court cases, all these redistrictings around the country, all these fights, hopefully this becomes the thing that causes people in 9 months or a year to step back and say, we never want to do that again. Let's do a national redistricting reform. Let's do California style redistricting nationally with the Independent Redistricting Commission and, lay board of experts and others drawing lines, no partisan or elected official influence in the process, and have that be the way we do this going forward.
Paul, here as we're wrapping up, let me ask you one final question, kind of going away from the redistricting, almost looking ahead, right? Where we're going to be in this perpetual election cycle here with the primaries in June, and then we'll have the gubernatorial election next year, and then looking ahead a couple of years there, actually looking ahead there to the gubernatorial race. There's already some conversations about these education initiatives. I know there a millionaire's tax that I think SEIU is putting out. I know CTA is talking about bringing back the reauthorization of Prop 30/Prop 55, which just basically sustains education funding. I know you kind of stay close, not only the data, but just kind of the appetite of voters. Generally speaking, it's a very complicated time right now, like politically, partisanship. What do you any hunch about just what we may be talking about a year from now, especially on some of these big initiatives that we're coming back asking California voters to approve either new taxes or the extension of taxes?
Yeah, I think this is always interesting because you might have an environment where it seems as though the public is kind of like against new taxes, but then you come forward with a tax that has a great justification that voters believe is like appropriately targeted, and you can be very successful. And a lot of it has to do with things that we aren't going to know for, maybe the next few months or maybe the next 6 or 9 months, where voter attitudes are going to be going into a November 2026 election versus now. And obviously, when you're talking about these, you're talking largely about ballot measures that would be on in the general election, not in the primary, because only the legislature can put things on the primary. But the other thing to think about is, we could have very different electorate in November, depending on what happens in the governor's race. There is a lot of polling showing a big multi-way race for governor, 2 Republicans and 6 or 8 or so Democrats. And I've actually done some modeling based on the most recent polling that shows, the most likely outcome is a Democrat versus a Republican. If it's a Democrat versus a Democrat, you're going to have a wildly Democratic leaning electorate because a lot of Republicans aren't going to vote. And in the 1 in 12, 1 in 15, very low possibility arena, if we did have a Republican versus Republican, you could all have the opposite. You could have an electorate where Democrats are like, why am I even voting in this thing? And make it very, very, very hard to pass a ballot measure that had additional spending. So part of what probably will need to be done is return to this conversation after the primary when we know what the setup is of the gubernatorial election in order to better determine what likely turnout looks like. And also by then we might have a better sense of where kind of the country is. Mm-hmm. A lot of the attitudinal things will define turnout, and that's probably half the math about, what the impact is going to be on the success or failure of those ballot measures.
Paul, you have been a wealth of knowledge. I feel like I have learned so much here in this 30 minutes. Paul Mitchell, data consultant, redistricting effort here in California and nationwide. Paul, it's been an honor to have you here on the show. We look forward to having you next time.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
And folks, want to let you know, ACSA's Leadership Summit coming your way November 6th through 8 in San Francisco. It is an incredible event. Take a look. ACSA's Leadership Summit, November 6th through 8 in San Francisco. For more information, go to ACSA.org/professional-learning. Edgar will be hosting our Every Student Succeeding award ceremony at that event. The opportunity, Edgar, I know this is always that one where we go, how long will it be before we shed a tear listening to these inspirational stories about these great kids? It's usually like right around region 10, right in the middle, where I'm like, all right, that's it. I got to step out.
Yeah, if people haven't, and there's ability, even if you're not at the conference, definitely come check out the stories, go on our, on our here on all of our media to learn about the students being recognized. But if you're there at the summit, this is a reason to go to the summit, just alone, just to go to that ceremony and hearing about the stories and the challenges and the perseverance that so many of these students and their families have overcome. It's definitely one of the highlights, not only of next week, of frankly, the whole year of the work we do at ACSA. So still time to register, especially for our folks here nearby in Northern California. Come join us. It's shaping up to be a great week next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, if you like what you've seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to like us on Facebook, follow us, and subscribe on YouTube and LinkedIn. When you do, you'll get instant alerts once you turn your notifications on when we're about to come on the air with breaking news, and then an alert when we have our regular Wednesday show. And if you have great stories happening in your school communities, we want to tell those stories too. Send your photos, your talking points, your news releases to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl, at mcarl@acsa.org. We are well past the bottom of the hour. Edgar, I feel like I've learned so much ahead of next week's special election. No show next week because Edgar and I will be at Leadership Summit, but we come back right after that with lots more of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive Wednesdays on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.